I have a startup called Crayon. We are on a mission to reduce financial stress in the moments that matter. I come from a family of small business owners. I knew I wanted to do a Bachelor of Commerce, and this seemed like a great way to get myself through university because you got paid to essentially work. I managed to do an internship at UBS, one at Goldman Sachs, and one at the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, in between studying and doing honours. And that was a really great way. You almost get to try before you buy.
Yeah.
For most people in my experience, it's not, I want $1 million in the bank. It's not necessarily a number. And that money is in a way a means to an end. For most people, it's not the end itself. And so I'm very much about meeting people where they're at when they're having a big life change and helping them navigate through that.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Ways to Wealth. Today I'm joined by Stephanie. Stephanie, why don't you give us the TLDR on who you are and what you're working on?
Thank you very much for having me, Charlie. I have a startup called Crayon. We are on a mission to reduce financial stress in the moments that matter. And for me, one of those big moments was having my first child, which about 6 years ago now. I have a background in finance. It's what I studied, it's what I worked in, that's where I had my first grad job. But it wasn't really until my first kid came along that I took my own personal finances a lot more seriously. And so I'm very much about meeting people where they're at when they're having a big life change and helping them navigate through that.
Oh, cool. Nice. Awesome. And what was some of that kind of lead up? What did that lead up look like before you kind of ended up at Crayon? If you can cast yourself back a little bit to perhaps what got you interested in finance and how you got into the industry, what were they kind of...
I think, like a lot of people, probably a mixture of interest and luck. So I grew up in Australia. When I was finishing high school, there was a program called the Co-op program at the University of New South Wales, and it combines work experience with study. So you could work and that counted as subjects. And I was lucky because it was the first year they had a finance stream going. I come from a family of small business owners. I knew I wanted to do a Bachelor of Commerce, and this seemed like a great way to get myself through university because you got paid to essentially work. I soon, not long into working at an investment bank, I soon realized that they were definitely getting their bellies well. But it was a fantastic deal for me too, like the amount of experience. So I signed up, got lucky to be accepted. And as part of the 4 years I was doing my undergrad, I managed to do an internship at UBS, one at Goldman Sachs, and one at the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, in between studying and doing honours. So all of that was within the normal time frame, and that was a really great way. You almost get to try before you buy.
Yeah.
And my first internship saw me land on the trading floor, probably a place I wouldn't have picked for myself. I didn't know much about it, and what I did know about it was probably from movies and that. And true to form, when I did land on the trading floor, I think there were about 5 women and 100 blokes.
Yeah.
This was back in 2006. But it turned out I really liked it. I liked the immediate feedback. I liked transparency. I'm not probably aggressive by nature. I still haven't yelled at anyone at work. But I did like that robustness, and there's a lot of banter. I ended up doing a couple of other internships, but came back to join the trading floor part-time while I was studying, and then joined them full-time once I had graduated. So that was really my first foray into the professional finance world.
What on the floor, what were you focused on?
I joined the equity derivatives team. This was back in Sydney at UBS, which is the largest trading floor in the Southern Hemisphere by size. And they had a very robust equity derivatives team, joined on the desk. And as a junior, you kind of move around and do a few different things. So did vanilla derivatives, some exotic derivatives. But my last role there was running the hybrids desk. So hybrids are this kind of funny, or funky, I should say, part of the market between debt and equity. They have different structures. They're usually, banks will have hybrids, some corporates have hybrids. And that market had taken quite a beating during the GFC.
Right.
A lot of people, for example, had bought bank hybrids thinking that's the same as a term deposit. And if you know anything about a capital structure, term deposits are right up here. Hybrids are right down the bottom.
Right.
And so people, I think, have been a bit gun shy post global financial crisis, which is when I joined. I joined the bank in 2009. And so as a result, it was a small part of the market, and I guess they figured I could have a punt as a 20-something-year-old and do the stockbroking on that side, and I ran a book alongside that. So I really enjoyed that part. It was a challenging role. You know, I was a young woman. Most of my clients were very senior fund managers with a lot more experience than me. I didn't probably share that much interest. You know, I wasn't big into footy as an example or things like that. So
Yeah.
it took a while for me to crack that market. I remember one of the largest fund managers, it felt like I was broking to his voicemail for a very long time, but I got there in the end. So it was a good lesson in grit, I think, and perseverance, and just putting one foot in front of the other and trying to find your niche. You know, I wasn't going to be the stockbroker who called you up and talked to you about the footy over the weekend, or that just wasn't authentic to who I was. But what I am very good at, or what I like doing, is spreadsheets and macros and being technical. And so that's where I could add a lot of value, is, you know, and differentiate myself from the other brokers in the market. And that's kind of what I ended up doing. And that's how I built relationships. So it was also another good lesson in learning to navigate something while you do it, still being true to yourself, right?
Yeah.
I think people can smell that inauthenticity from a mile off.
Right. So you weren't trying to copy the playbook of the person that you may have
What was
preceded, just completely different. But you found your way, and it's really cool that you found your way in a technical manner, because that's quite, again, it's true, right? Like in terms of, it's not just talking about, soccer or the footy or whatever it is. It's like, hey, I'm really good at what I do, and I really care, and I'm diligent, and I think that's quite a good way to put your foot forward. Would you say that what was the biggest misconception that you had that you realized wasn't the case? Like, a lot of people think of trading desks and they think of, they wouldn't differentiate a trading floor from a hedge fund, perhaps, because it's kind of in the media and in the kind of zeitgeist kind of feels similar, but it's not. It's quite different.
No, it is.
So,
and hedge funds might be a client of yours.
exactly. So, were there any misconceptions you came in with that were completely kind of extinguished quickly?
I think the issue was I didn't know much about the trading, so perhaps didn't have preconceptions, just from, ignorance is bliss more than anything else, Charlie. So that'd be one. But I do remember, because I was interning for UBS while I was still at university, I would go along to grad recruitment events on campus. And when I would talk to young women about what I did, and so many people would say to me, I could never do that. And I really have a lot of empathy for that, because I would have probably put myself in that boat had I not been allocated that rotation as part of my co-op program. So that's what drove me to start Capital W. It's the first organization in Australia for women studying undergrad business. And it's been around, well, I'm going to get it wrong now, but maybe 16 years plus. I'm probably aging myself as I say.
You've done that like multiple times already, and I'm like, wait, you were. Yeah, anyway, that's crazy. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's still going. It's got amazing sponsors. I think the thing I'm most proud of is that I had nothing to do with it. So the teams that came after me were amazing, really capable, took it to bigger and better levels. I go back every so often and volunteer as part of the mentoring program or something like that. But I've got nothing to do with the day-to-day running. And in fact, they're so much more professionalized than it was when we ran it, and a bunch of university students just trying to get something off the ground.
Yeah.
And so that was what really sparked me to do that, along with some of the other co-op scholars and other university friends, to open up what's possible for people. Because if I hadn't had that opportunity, I certainly would not have elected to join or apply for a trading floor.
Sometimes it's serendipity and being thrown into a different environment that you didn't really expect, that surprises you and gives you a great asset of experience. So you then, and did you end up in the US after that?
I did, yeah. So I was on the trading floor full time for about 4 years.
Yeah.
And had a great experience, but wanted to try something different. The good part of the co-op program is that you're on such a finance track from a really early age. From 18, I was on a finance track. But as a result, I never stopped to think, is there anything else, or what other even parts of commerce or business might be interesting. And because we did work experience, the actual number of subjects we did at university was narrowed down. And so most of those were finance as well. And I got to the point in my mid-20s and I thought, well, maybe there's something else out there that might pique my interest. So I ended up applying for a general Sir John Monash scholarship, which sponsors Australians to study anywhere in the world. And I was fortunate enough to get that. And that opened up the door for me to go to the US.
Do you think that your experience on the desk helps you secure those roles, like secure your spots in the US and at the institutions you went to, or not?
Yes, I definitely think so. And I remember even applying for the scholarship, which was the first step in the process to go overseas for me. I remember thinking, oh, I'll never give it to someone who's worked in an investment bank, because when you look at the profiles of people who get this, it's doctors and engineers and scientists and international development, and they don't really pick a lot of folks like who had been at an investment bank. Or
Did they ever tell you why?
I did have quite a strong social angle to what I wanted to do. In fact, I thought about for a while there leaving finance altogether and doing something like international development. But then I realized I really enjoy finance, I like it and I'm good at it. So how can I use those skills and that knowledge but in a different application? And that was really what my scholarship application interview was all about.
Yeah.
And originally I went to the States with the idea of doing impact investing up there. So I studied an MBA and an MPA, so Master of Public Administration. And in between my studies, I did internships, one at Axion, which is a fintech VC fund, but very much with a developing world lens to it. And then I worked for a startup in Indonesia, and again with quite a strong social mission to it. And what I found is actually like the doing more than I like the investing part. I wanted to be able to...
I liked operating.
Yeah, I like the operating part of it. And so when I graduated, I had in between all this met and married a Kiwi, and he had stayed in New Zealand when I had gone to the States. And so we did about 4 years long distance between Australia and New Zealand, then New Zealand and the US. Decided it was probably time to, call one city home. And he was already established here, so I moved here to join him about 8 years ago now. And when I moved back, the startup scene, Xero had already been very successful at Amy, but it's very different to what it is today.
Yep.
And I ended up joining a startup called Vend, which is a software company for retailers. And it was one of those, know someone who makes an introduction and got through that way. So that's how I ended up on the operational side.
Cool. And what did you do at Vend? What was your role?
A couple of different things. I joined as chief of staff to Alex Barlow, who was CEO at the time.
This was post-founder CEO.
That's right. So when I was interviewing with Alex, Vaughan had just sat down and they were doing the search, and then Alex was appointed right before I joined. And it was one of those where there's no job description. It's just get your foot in the door at somewhere exciting and figure it out from there.
I've heard that it's one of the best roles to have nowadays, chief of staff early. It's such for great experience, and maybe again similar to your trading floor kind of experience of you kind of get to see a lot.
You get to see a lot for the level that you're at.
Yeah.
So I got to sit in all the exec meetings, but some sensitive people ones, and help prepare board papers. I got to see the board. There's all that exposure that I wouldn't have received if I were in a different role. Get to bounce ideas with Alex and all that. So that was really cool, and I did that. And then a woman called Anna White joined about maybe 9 months into my role at Vend. And she came from McKinsey. She joined as Chief Strategy Officer. And so I switched to working with her and doing special projects. And that was fun too, because there are obviously execs for each area, but sometimes there are either projects that cross across departments, or that might be kind of something on fire that needs to get fixed. And so I would be allocated to that project and work on that with Anna and often with Alex too. And so that was good fun. One of those projects was around the customer service team. And it's just with all startups, you build a system and then that system breaks, right? Because you've reached another level of intensity or size. And that's really where the customer service team was at. And so my last role before going on parental leave was working with another woman called Tale Wood to essentially turn around the customer service team and rebuild a lot of the infrastructure there. And it's always very different when you've made a recommendation to the board to then have to execute on that recommendation.
Yeah.
But it was really a really formative experience to go through that as well.
Cool. So it's basically like you're at Vend and you're doing this great work. You've been in a few little components, but the last big thing you executed on was this transformation of the customer service team, which Yeah, it's a cool space to be in, actually.
It is really cool.
Actually, where everything kind of lives. You know, like at the end of the day, if the customers aren't happy, it's a
Yeah,
nice,
if you win them but you can't retain them, that's a problem.
problem that, right? Don't want a leaky bucket. So, and then you end up on parental leave, and this is where you have your aha moment.
Well, sort of. I went off thinking I'll come back to Venn. It was still an exciting place to work. Business pre-acquisition.
Yeah.
Uh, and I knew I wasn't going to go back into that role, so I worked with them to backfill that permanently. That was fine. And then the idea was, let's see.
Well, you kind of would have grown above that role by then, right?
Well, I think I had gotten a lot out of that role, and I was lucky to do it. But I was also interested in what might come next. Knowing that startups change so quickly, there wasn't a point discussing that before I went on leave. And then towards the end of leave, I did have conversations with them about returning, but I had been thinking about ideas in my head for quite some time. I'd either discuss it with a friend or with my husband and then kind of discard it or park it. And the thing that I kept wrestling with is there are so many financial products out there, so much information, even in a pre-AI world of, personal finance, but yet it's something so many people struggle with. And I would see this even with good friends who I would say are really well educated or are, great in other domains of life, but when it comes to managing money, would sometimes find some of it very challenging and maybe good at some bits like budgeting, but not so good at, say, building wealth. And I'm sure you probably see this in your work too, right, Charlie? Even people who've been very successful, managing your own money is a different domain of knowledge and skill set.
Yeah, as time goes on, I tend to veer towards thinking that, or observing that the people that are consuming the most financial products are often the people that are struggling most in that moment, because it's seasonal, I guess, in a sense. But what I've noticed, interestingly, I guess, is that actually, which was a surprise. No, was it a surprise to me? I think I wasn't really thinking about that like consciously when I now started observing that more. So I think that's a big takeaway for me was that, and that perhaps sometimes it's the more you earn. Yeah, it's the same as startups. And I guess what I've learned as well is the same with businesses, right? And we have a saying in our business, one of our principles is to live to trade another day. And that actually applies to personal life, like business life, everything, right? It's that ability to get up and keep playing the game. You learn that a lot in trading, of course. But I think in startups, it's the same thing. And then in personal life, like the freedom you have is basically based on how much liabilities you signed up to, ultimately.
100%. And it might be liabilities like debt and mortgage, but it also might be lifestyle creep or school fees or whatever that.
Or potentially double hedging yourself with different insurance products and stuff because you think that you're kind of protecting yourself. But then this new thing comes along, maybe it's like a floating mortgage thing or something, right? You're like, oh, that could really help me in a rainy day, but I'm also doing income protection. So one thing that I found out or I've seen from like unpicking some of this stuff is sometimes you buy something, and this is the same when you're in a store, right? You buy something for a specific purpose, and then you might go back to the same store the next week and buy something else for that same purpose, kind of almost forgetting that you previously kind of solved that problem or attempted to. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? So that was what I wrestled with is, how is there so much out there in product and available knowledge, but still not connecting with so many people? If you look at any survey about stress around the world, finances is up there. That's true here, but it's also true in almost every other country. So what's the disconnect? And that's what I was wrestling with. And ultimately, I figured we had one kid. We knew we wanted to have a second. I figured life wasn't going to get any easier, right? There was never going to be an optimum time to do a startup. Probably was 10 years ago before I had, mortgage and kids and all that stuff, but it wasn't going to be any easier in the future. And I'm a big believer in making the decisions that will leave me with the least amount of regret. And I think if I knew if I didn't give it a go, I would regret it later.
Yeah, right. That's cool. When you were going through your education career, like pre-band, I guess up to then, did you always know you were gonna kind of start something?
No, I wasn't one of those people hawking things out of my backpack at school. When you hear those stories,
for sure.
And I think that's amazing. That just wasn't me.
Like, where do you think that started to creep in? Was it end of Venn? Like, was it as you were coming to the end of Venn? Was it or just post Venn?
I think it was probably a combination of having studied up in the States and, there's a little bit of this, see it to believe it type of thing. Or
Different vibe.
it is. And then being at Vend and having seen someone build something from nothing. Like, it's really hard to build something from nothing, as you would know too. And I have mad respect for people who do that. So I thought, okay, I want to give it a go.
So you knew you wanted to give it something a go, and then you just kind of, like you said, you were kind of playing with ideas and parking them, and then this really kind of resonated and kept sticking. And did you find yourself keep going back to it?
I did, yeah. I think that's what ultimately pushed me to take the leap.
Yeah, and what was the first big leap? Whether it be a feature, I guess more detailed than a problem, because I think the problem that you were kind of had identified was clear, which was that around kind of life changes. Things change dramatically, and we're actually quite poor as humans at forecasting effectively all the impacts. I know so many people that were very excited about property pre-pandemic, into the pandemic, that it was clear that with interest rate changes that the dynamics of the cost was going to blow up. But it's hard to know that when you're in, and I guess you're dealing with life, I don't know.
Yes, and I think there is quite a bit of research there is quite a bit of research on how humans as a whole, to your point, we're not great at forecasting.
All forecasts are wrong.
Yeah.
But I think, forecasts are always wrong, but they're great. They're a great exercise because they actually allow you to think, right, about what you're doing, how you might get there, even though it'd be wrong.
So I hadn't even gotten to the life event part yet. At that point, it was just, what's this personal finance thing that people struggle with? So the first big leap was to quit and not return to Venn.
Right.
The second part was doing user interviews, so just chatting to people about their money to understand what part they struggled with the most. And the part I actually landed on was investing. So I went down the path of exploring robo-advice. We even got a transitional license from the FMA. We never actually ended up building something, but we had wireframes. We were testing with users.
What was the transitional thing?
There was a while there where, in order to give advice in New Zealand, you need a FAFBI list.
Yeah.
And there was a while there where they were changing from one regime to another. So I was able to work with the FMA to get a temporary license.
Yeah.
But we'd never ended up using that. And they were actually awesome to work with.
Yeah, they're really great.
They are really great. Shout out.
I don't know if they've changed much since you started working with them, but yeah, they're doing some really great stuff now. And really great to work with, I think, and communicate with. And I think that human element of, regulation and innovation kind of coming together is definitely a trend that I'm seeing in New Zealand happening. There's a real motivation to do something about, one, personal finances, but two, also competition.
Yeah, and make more things available to consumers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So went down that path, and I thought at that point, one of the things people struggle with investing is that confidence and that knowledge. So I wanted to build something that kind of put the financial literacy into the investment process. In between all that, got pregnant again, had my second child. And I remember being really worried when you're a startup in kind of like a one-person band with a couple of contractors, that when you're not pushing the boulder uphill, it's just going to roll straight back down. I was really worried about taking time off to spend with my second child. But obviously chose to take a bit of time off, tried to return and burnt out pretty fast, and ultimately took more time off and put tools down. And I was debating, what do I do here? Do I keep trying to push this boulder uphill? Do I go get a job and a salary, which would be pretty helpful? Or do I have another crack at something else? And ultimately, over the summer, decided that I was going to leave the investing thing behind. I wasn't ready to go put my name in the hat for another role yet, and started again. So about 2 years into the journey, binned it all. And
what was that? What year was that?
That would have been 2021.
2021.
It was beginning of 2022, I should say. Beginning of 2022. So that was hard too, when you've put time, money, effort into something.
And that was bootstrap. That was just kind of
bootstrap. Yeah,
cool.
And to say, okay, we're just gonna
can it.
And I wasn't done with the personal finance bit. And when I thought,
What was it about the investing that made you stop?
probably something I should have looked at earlier, but the business model for robo investing, and I don't know if you've probably looked into this too, but it's in some ways when you look at the States where it was the earliest, it's big, but the margins are
Tight.
razor thin. And you think about the volume you have to.
So you think
Yeah.
like Wealthfront,
Exactly. Yeah, it's that
stuff like that.
type of thing. And they have built great businesses, but if you actually look at, say, a Robinhood, which started after them.
Yeah, because Wealthfront, I don't know if you ever remember Tim Ferriss, because he pushed Wealthfront for a very long time on his podcast.
Oh, did he? I didn't.
Like years ago, I remember because I started as a goldsmith, then got into software. And I remember the goldsmithing days, because you're not using your brain, but you're using your hands.
Uh-huh.
I would listen to a lot of business podcasts and tech podcasts, and he was always on Wealthfront, years and years ago.
Interesting.
Anyway,
So it's been around for a while and started
scaled
later, but scaled way faster. And I thought, okay, maybe that as a business model will struggle, especially here in New Zealand.
Well, you can't get the volume.
You can't get the volume. And I probably should have thought about that way earlier in the process. But anyhow, you live and learn. So I thought, look, and I had got different conversations with folks, and I realized, hey, it's just not, even if you get to 100 million AUM in a short period of time, which would be pretty hard work just to get to that, the margin on that was still not going to be great.
Yeah. And it's also the margin is, well, it depends on the model you pick with robo and advising or investing, but the model may also not be 100% aligned with the client if you want to get the margins that you want, right? I think that's where kind of Robinhood and some of these other places do get a lot of margin, is through encouraging perhaps behavior, or, very big at the moment in the US especially is options. The options market has exploded in retail, and that's where all the margins are. So a lot of the brokers are like, come and trade equities for free, but we're going to give you the heroin, which is the options.
Which, having been on the options desk, I can tell you, it's really dicey.
And really hard.
And quite sophisticated. To do it well, you have to be sophisticated. I think the other part was, I had started on all of this in March 2020 by coincidence, not because of the pandemic, but it aligned with when my parental leave had wrapped up. And in that intervening 2 years, the landscape had changed so much. That financial literacy and education problem had been solved in different ways too. You think about some of the podcasts that are really big now in our space, and financial influencers. A lot of them really took off during the pandemic. And so part of what I was trying to solve with the platform I was building was also being solved in another way now. And so I think that need had gone away. Sharesies and Hatch exploded in that time. And so, which is great. I'm very happy that more people have more avenues to access and try and learn. But at the same time, it just meant what I was building was probably less relevant 2 years down the track.
Cool. Awesome. So, and then you
started again.
And
I thought, well, why do people invest? And I've been curious, you probably talk to people all the time about why they're investing. But for most people, in my experience, it's not, I want $1 million in the bank. It's not necessarily a number, but it's about what that number represents for them. Is it about an opportunity they want to open up for their children, or a once in a lifetime trip that they want to take, or to buy a house in their dream area, or what have you. But there is very much, if you keep asking why someone's doing something, it's very much about something going on in their life, and that money is in a way a means to an end. For most people, it's not the end itself.
Totally.
And so when I thought about that, and I thought about my own experience around, when did I start taking my own personal finances much more seriously? It was when I had a kid, and my position changed materially, and then, we dropped to one income because I'm on a startup. All of that changes your world quite a lot. And so I figured I probably wasn't the only person who'd been caught a bit unaware. And I really have no excuses, right? I'm certainly got the education to figure this out, and I had no idea what was coming for me. And that's what started me down the path of the life event. And we've always thought about different life events.
Yeah.
Having a child's just one of many, right? You get into your first serious relationship, you move overseas, you buy a home, you separate from your partner, you're staring down retirement, you get a major medical diagnosis. There are a whole lot of things that are happening for people that...
Are you focused on catalysts?
That's right, yeah. Because I think part of the challenge with personal finance is it's a broccoli, not chocolate. For most people, they're not super excited to tackle it, right? It's in the admin basket. You're going to get to it eventually, but it's not fun. It's not the thing you wake up thinking, yes, today my personal admin finance day. And on the flip side, a lot of the times not doing something about your money doesn't bite you today. It doesn't hurt you today. It hurts you later. And so because of the time inconsistency with this, it's challenging to get people to act sometimes. Most of us don't wake up on a random day and say, hey, this is the day. I'm going to get it all together. Let's go.
Yeah.
Usually there's something happening in our lives.
You're almost forced to.
Yeah, it's some sort of forcing function. And so I thought, okay, well, how about we meet people at those moments when they want to engage, where they're more open to it. And often those big changes also mean all your other systems are breaking. And that's, from a habit formation perspective, a good time to change it up because other things are changing too. And that's where I landed. And I figured we should pick one life event to start with. And parental leave seemed to be the one to make sense from a personal experience. And so we went down that path of really becoming the experts in the finances of having a child.
And that's still the play.
That's still the play today. We've expanded from there. We now
Starting to experiment.
We are, early career. So getting your first paycheck. I don't know about you, Charlie, but when I got my first decent paycheck after university, no one sat me down and said, hey, you're actually getting a really good paycheck for the age that you're at. Have you thought about it?
Very interesting, isn't it? For me, it was different because I went entrepreneurial quite early. And my first career in goldsmithing was a career that allowed me to do other things. I was playing esports professionally for many, many years. And why I got an apprenticeship in goldsmithing was just so I didn't have to get into debt.
Okay. That's epic to pursue such different...
I mean, that was really the thing that then eventually got me into tech, was my love for gaming and esports and what I learned from that. But I do see a lot of like young guys and, we have a community around eccuity and, we speak to a lot of young people because, we are close to the universities and stuff. And I actually see a lot of young kids out there, they're early 20s and they're onto it. But you're right, they do get this huge paycheck relative to the prior moment. And there's a huge opportunity that 5 years, 6 years down the line, them will thank them for.
Yes. And I think you're right. They are, I would say, more onto it than my generation. I was at a cafe the other day and I overheard a couple of 20-something-year-olds talking about budgeting openly. Like, I don't know that would have been the case necessarily 10, 20 years ago when I was starting out my career, which is awesome. I love that people are more comfortable talking to their friends about it. But I think there is an opportunity, particularly from an employer's perspective, to help people really set those foundations. So that's another one we're doing now. Redundancy and job loss is another one. It's a huge thing when the loss of a paycheck that comes, and also often the confidence and the uncertainty you have to.
And nowadays, even more so, right? What we're seeing now with this kind of post-labor economic kind of environment, it kind of changes the dynamic, or at least has created a lot of uncertainty and fear, especially around entrance. And then I would say, I guess, that middle management layer has also been impacted, and there's been a lot of redundancies. So it's a tough one, especially when there's so much uncertainty.
That's right. So, we can help people think through, how long is my runway? What does plan A, B, C, and D potentially look like? What are things that other people who've gone through this would suggest, etc. So we've done that. And then now we're moving also into more foundational topics. So we very much still take a life event, but we work through employers. That's our business model.
Do you go directly to the employer, or are you working through like EAPs, or are they?
No, we work. I guess I see them as complementary. A lot of people use EAP for more mental and emotional well-being, and to be fair, some of them do have financial well-being. I see us as the expertise on those life events, and therefore sit alongside an EAP provider.
Yeah, cool. So when you guys get an objection from the employer that they already have EAP, you say, well, no, we're not EAP. That's
right. And if you think about EAP utilization rates, I think they're usually somewhere between 3 to 5%.
Right.
So in any given year, for every 100 employees, let's say 5 will approach EAP on average.
Right.
And that means 95% or 95% of your staff members are not getting the support. And we know from the statistics that a lot of people are financially stressed.
Yep.
The Financial Services Council, the Retirement Commission, they publish reports quite frequently. And it is something that between 50 and 70% of us are stressed about money on a regular basis. So there's some disconnect there. Either people don't realize that EAP has that as an offering, or it's
Not as structured either.
no. And we are very structured in how we've got a program of work. And I don't know, I'm sure the quality of it's great, but it's also that perhaps people see it as an ambulance at the bottom of a cliff. And we're very much trying to be more of a fence at the top. So to prevent you from, these pitfalls down the road.
Yeah, awesome. So like, do you remember the moment where you felt like you had product market fit? Like where you
Feel like
you're still trying to figure it out, you think? Have you guys got funding?
No, so it's always strapped through revenue.
I like this because I'm not anti-VC, but I guess I'm pro equity. I mean, that's where the name eccuity comes from. It's eccuity and equity combined. That's the name.
I like it. Okay.
And I think in this modern day, like it is, I mean, it's interesting because ownership is a very negative word now, actually, right? And I think it is because we should think of ourselves more as stewarding, but ownership is a good, easy way to understand, like, that you're building on something. And I think obviously in this day and age, especially with this post-labor economic kind of tension, I think that we need to help people like build equity, not build liability and fragility. And I think that it's awesome that you guys are building frameworks and principles to help people with this. And that's how I think about it too, in round principles and frameworks, because that's what people need. So that's really cool. So what would you say success looks like in the next 5 years for you guys?
Success is working with employers for them to say, hey, if you're going through something big in life, we've got Crayon there to help you navigate that financially.
Yeah, that's cool. Do you think you would seek external funding? Have you tried seeking?
I haven't tried. I would be open to it at the right point in time. I want to be able to prove out as much as we can on our own, so that if and when we go to raise, those conversations are different. To be
For leverage is stronger on you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So success, 5 years, like any kind of things you think about, maybe other geographies, like would you go back to Australia as a market?
We do quietly service Australia already, but mostly through New Zealand employers that have a presence over there. The tricky part with Australia is around their financial advice regulation. So what we provide is strictly financial coaching and education. We are not providing advice, and we're always really clear with both employers and their teams about what we do.
Yeah.
I still think there's a lot you can do without needing to recommend products, which is pretty much where the bright line is here.
That's right.
And so we will never recommend a product to someone. What that does mean is that we are completely independent. We don't have any commissions. We don't have any,
Love that.
trail fees, etc. We are only being paid by the employer, and therefore our only interest is to help that employee. And so I'm a big believer that if you give people the right information and you ask the right questions, all of us are capable of making good decisions at that point in time. And that's our job, is to make sure you've got the information that you need, and we're asking you those questions and you can reflect on that and make those decisions. And so because we take that model in Australia, without getting into the weeds, but we have spent quite a bit of time talking to Australian lawyers because we wanted to be able to service those employers and do that properly. So we did invest in getting legal advice there. And it is just so much trickier about what you can and can't say.
And it seems like the regulator there is less collaborative and more kind of authoritarian in how they engage.
I haven't dealt with that.
So I am speculating to a degree, but I guess from the grape, whatever vine, it seems to be that a little bit more combative, but that might just be fake news. But I mean,
I think they've had the Royal Commission into banking. They've had a few of those really tough scandals over there. So rightly so, the regulator is probably going to be scrutinize
Right.
a bit more over there, but also just their legislation.
Also, they've had bigger issues, I guess, that have exploded, is kind of your point. So, which makes naturally them more defensive, right? Because they're like, well, we've had these things happen and we need to be more combative against that. It makes total sense.
Yes. So for those reasons, we are quietly, and we do it legitimately, but we're also careful about going over there.
And growing too quickly, so that then it's harder to roll things back and yeah, it makes total sense.
And if anything, we might go more by life event than by geography.
Yeah, right.
At some point, if we were I think there's a lot more traction to be had in New Zealand before we needed to complicate it with another jurisdiction.
Yeah, but do you think that would be the natural one, or do you think, yeah, you could be more geographically agnostic, almost Dave Ramsey-esque?
I think
not that that's geographically. It's interesting, because his reach is global, but his product is very obviously US centric.
A lot of what we do is to help someone navigate their local system. So, as an example, our roots are in parental leave. We know that legislation very well. We understand employers' policies really well. We run the New Zealand Parental Leave Register. We've documented what over 350 employers offer in parental leave policies in New Zealand. So kind of part of the magic of working with us is that we can help you navigate your entitlements. Often when we're sitting with couples around parental leave plans, we're able to say, hey, have you thought about A, B, and C? And more often than not, we're able to surface up an option they hadn't thought about because we know the legislation and employer policies so well.
Yeah.
And that's always really exciting because it often means that couple, one or both of them, could spend more time at home that they wanted to spend than they might have otherwise. It's not always the case, but it's interesting to have those conversations. But that requires really good local knowledge to be able to do that. And so I don't think we're going to be a generic, budgeting 101. There are other people who already do a really great job of that. Differentiation is around that life event, and that life event is very dependent on where you are. So again, taking that job loss example, what entitlements, what is it like to navigate wins, and making sure you don't miss out on what might be available to you while you're navigating that really tough part of your life. So again, that requires local knowledge. And if you think about somewhere like the States, it's not really one country, right? You'd have to go state by state. Yeah.
So where do you guys focus on? I guess where do you guys spend a lot of time on the R&D of the business? Is it legislative? Is it framework principles, kind of almost like curriculums, or is it tech? And being bootstrapped, how have you navigated, I guess, weaving all of that together?
Originally, I would say it was around the legislation. We really carved a name in that parental leave space, and it's a great.
That was so smart.
Well, yeah, yes and no. It was a lot of investment without a lot of revenue to begin with.
Right.
But what it does mean is we've been able to have a reason to chat to employers and add value to them. And often now when they're reviewing their parental leave policies, we will have a conversation with them around what are we seeing in the market. If they're trying to tackle a problem, how have we seen hundreds of other employers try and tackle that problem? Because we've had the benefit of having read so many policies now. So that was where we initially put a lot of our energy. Now I would say it's that second one around the curriculum and frameworks, and how do you support people to make changes, and how do we scale? We do a lot of one-on-one financial coaching, which is really effective, but how do you scale that and not lose the magic as you scale? And that's been a big focus for us this year around interactive learning. And I still am a big believer in having a Crayon coach to help people on that journey, but it can be in different forms. It doesn't need to be hours and hours one-on-one. It could be around email support. Maybe it's around some targeted interventions and experiment.
Did you do a lot of that yourself in the beginning?
In the beginning, yeah, just me. And now I've got a bit of a team of who work with me part-time, contractors, because we're not quite at that revenue stability yet to have full-time employees.
And are they typically, how do you find those guys?
They've been amazing. I've been very lucky because I think they also believe in what we're doing, but it's been largely through word of mouth, or we have advertised from time to time.
You've advertised for the coaches. Yeah.
Yeah. But mostly, more for interns who've been helping us, but the coaches have been through people we know, because it's a combination of both the financial knowledge
and then
exactly, and the actual coaching side of it.
Yeah. Is there a particular background that they often end up having?
We're still a very small team, so it's probably too early to tell pattern match that.
Yeah. Because I find that quite interesting. We have an expert network as a part of our membership model, which is, I guess, well, it's definitely very different in terms of what we're trying to tackle, I think, for people. But it's something that I think about a lot, about how do you scale that sort of infrastructure, and how do you make sure that like everyone's singing from the same song sheet
Quality.
and the quality's high enough and stuff. And like Naval was making some tweets the other day about how product or business needs to be opinionated, and I definitely feel more strongly about that as time goes on, around being more opinionated in product and being more principles and framework focused, because technology is actually in many senses commoditized. The cost of developing is going down quite dramatically. So that's kind of those are the things that are kind of shaking in my head.
It is a tricky one to navigate. We've been lucky so far, but we've also been probably expanding.
Seems like you're really
deliberately.
Yeah, it seems like you're really deliberate and not getting ahead of yourself, and just being very methodical and well thought out. Do you think you got that from your risk management being trading derivatives?
I'm not sure. It's probably just a function of being bootstrapped. We can't go out and hire 20 people tomorrow. It's just not an option for us. So we have to be slow. And I'm not an engineer. I can't whip up a product overnight. But the flip side of that is it forces us to think, okay, well, what can we test? What's a low tech?
Yeah.
And we're probably fortunate to be in this time frame with lots of low code, no code options and etc. So that's probably more timing, not to do with us, but
Yeah, circumstance, but you'll take it.
yeah, I will take it.
It's an edge.
And then that last question around technology, we've just started building our first bit of custom tech, and it's around helping people understand where their money is going. Recognizing there are lots of budgeting apps, just to be clear, we're not trying to do a budgeting app. But what we have realized is, regardless of what life event you are navigating, you have to know where your money's going. Like, cash flow is critical here.
Yeah.
And so it's about having those, being able to analyze it quickly using Akahu to pull in the data, and then be able to have a very non-judgmental conversation around, hey, this is where your money's going. This is what's coming up ahead with what you're navigating. Is this what you want to happen? It's not for me to tell you. I'm never going to be waving my finger saying you shouldn't do that. And I know even when looking at my personal spending, there's always things to clean up there or change.
Yeah.
But to be able to support that in a way that works with how we coach.
Yeah, cool. How did you align with your partner around doing this? And then like, how are you managing that? I think for us, we talk to a lot of founders and business owners, and one of the main things that we think about and try and encourage is obviously alignment in the household, to then create alignment and longevity in the endeavor, the really hard endeavor. So how did you guys kind of manage that?
Yeah, I think I've been very fortunate to have a partner who's really supportive of me trying things. He knows how I think important it is for me to be able to test that out.
Yeah.
And we do have ongoing conversations around, what it's like for our household. We've got 2 young kids, obviously want to provide opportunities for them as well. And, we've been able to sustain it thus far, but we do, and usually it's me, not him, who brings it up around like, hey, what's like...
Because you feel like you're taking the risk.
Yeah, exactly. And also, what's coming up, and, what is it? What's the trade-off? Because with money, there is always a trade-off. And sometimes I think our role at Crayon is to help people try and make the best trade-off decision possible that they can, because you can't have everything. And so what are we willing to not do so that I can do this?
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the pod today. I've really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, Chuck.
Cheers.